they don't really look at the minute details of what we do. They're not going to see the difference between a 500 and a 100,000, and they're not going to see the difference between a 500 and a 1,000 hour pilot the way we would.
Welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, the podcast that helps aircraft owners and aviation businesses learn and understand the complex world of aviation insurance and risk management. From the basic principles of aviation insurance to risk management techniques and updates on the aviation insurance market, the Aviation Insurance Podcast is your guide to traverse the world of aviation insurance. Now, here's your host, Tim Bonnell.
Well, welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, where we talk about all things aviation insurance and safety and risk management. And we've kind of been looking at different topics. And I thought it'd be really interesting to bring on today's guest and talk about the aviation insurance business in general, but particularly about underwriting non-standard risks. And there are a number of underwriting companies who do this, but Mike Chevrette came to the top of my list when thinking of who would be a great podcast guest to bring to you, our audience, and to discuss this issue. So I've known Mike almost 25 years. I've enjoyed working with him and his team, and so I'm looking forward to talking about these various issues and bringing his knowledge and humor to you. And I know you're going to learn a lot from this episode. So, Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so just tell our audience a little bit about your journey becoming the division president of aviation there at Great American Insurance Company.
It's been kind of a long and sordid career. When I was 17, I enlisted in the Marine Corps. My parents actually had to sign the papers for me, which they were pretty enthusiastic about doing. I don't know how I should read into that. This was in 1988, and I spent 4 years active duty in the Corps as an air traffic controller. At the end of my enlistment, I knew that I wanted to stay in aviation. I was hooked. But when I got out, there was a hiring freeze for air traffic controllers. And then in 93, when Bill Clinton took office, he lifted the freeze. Yeah. But in doing so, he also reopened hiring to all of the strikers that Reagan fired back in 81 or 82. So that put me so darn far back on the list. I needed to figure something else out. So I enrolled at Embry-Riddle and ended up getting a bachelor's degree. After college, I was then hired as an underwriter by a little company in Scottsdale, Arizona that no longer exists. After about 20 years in the business, working for some pretty good companies and people, I felt like there was something missing in the industry. I felt like there was a lot of opportunity to insure a lot of the things that most people don't want to insure. To me, I felt like it was just mathematics. There had to be a way to find out. There had to be a way to insure these risks that nobody else was terribly thrilled about. So in 2013, I wrote up a business plan, went knocking on doors, and in December of that year, Great American said yes. So I've been here ever since. We're in our 11th year now. And since they're still issuing me a paycheck every 2 weeks, I'm assuming it's going reasonably well from their perspective.
Yeah, I think so. And, one of the things I remember you telling somebody, or I heard you say or something, but you were just like, they were like, most companies don't do this, or do it this way. You go, well, I don't want to be like most companies. And so, that speaks volumes as to what you just said, filling a need that wasn't already there. And, obviously, if you're around, more than 10 years in this business as a company, you're doing some things successfully. So that in mind, what are you most excited about in the aviation insurance market today or in the near future?
There's so much new technology that's been coming in over the last decade and what we're looking forward to in the years to come, particularly with regards to drones. I mean, I've never seen such explosive growth in our industry. We see a lot of drones today being used for things like crop dusting and photography. But there are some companies that are developing some bigger and heavier drones that are going to be used for things like heavy lift, cargo delivery, maybe even passenger carriage. So it's really a growth sector that we have not seen in this industry in a long time. Aside from drones, there's a lot of other really neat things going on. Within the next decade, we're likely to see supersonics return back to the airline world, and maybe even to general aviation. There are some plans for some corporate jets that'll break the sound barrier. So things like that, that's when the airplane geek in me really comes out and flourishes.
Yeah, definitely a lot of innovation coming in a new way that it hasn't in quite some time. So definitely an exciting time to be a part of it. But so on the other side, what are your biggest concerns, the aviation or aviation insurance market right now?
These days, my biggest concerns revolve around geopolitical uncertainty. I'll use Russia-Ukraine as an example. A few years back, Russia essentially confiscated over 900 transport category aircraft. At that point, the insurance industry was looking at a potential loss that very easily could have exceeded $15 billion. That's billion with a B. That would have been the biggest aviation loss in history, even larger than 9/11 was on the aviation side. I'm also really concerned about liability issues in the United States. Today's jury doesn't seem terribly interested in simply indemnifying a plaintiff. Nowadays, the goal is to punish someone. So some of the verdicts and settlement numbers we've been seeing are really just not sustainable. When I came into the business, a $10 million loss payment was something you saw every 5 or 6 years. Nowadays, we see 10 or 20 of those a year. And we're also into the hundreds in a lot of these settlements and verdicts. It's just not sustainable.
Yeah, you have some of these losses involving an automobile or not related to aviation, and it's a fraction, it seems like. But it seems like you get an airplane involved or aviation operation, and the number, which was already high, just seems to go up from there. So hopefully that will be, there's some sort of resolution of that in the future, but I'm not sure that there is. So getting into the non-standard risk, what is a non-standard aviation insurance risk?
So from our perspective, a non-standard risk is basically anything that my competitors don't want to insure. And we typically put them into one of 4 categories. The first category, and probably the most popular for us, is the transitioning pilot. So when a pilot goes from a Cessna 172 into a King Air, that can be a tough type of a risk to insure. Obviously, there's training and there's mentor time involved. We've done very well in this area only because we're going to ask for higher deductibles. We're obviously going to charge more money, and we're going to look for a very solid training program. Typically, we'll write that account for a year or two, and then once that pilot gets to the point where he's more palatable to our competitors, and they will turn around and write the risk. And that's fine. That type of scenario is built into our business model. The second category would be older pilots. By and large, the market looks at a pilot age 70 to 75 as being too old to fly by themselves. So very often we see those accounts being non-renewed or with restrictions for the pilot, such as dual only. In those cases, we find that we can still underwrite the risk because from a risk perspective, the second type of non-standard risk would be the older pilot. Most companies see pilots aged 70 or 75 as being too old to fly on their own. We see things a little differently. The way we look at an older pilot is, yes, a lot of the physical characteristics can tend to deteriorate: eyesight, hearing, reaction time. But the trade that we see is that you get better decision-making. The older pilots typically don't fly at night or during bad weather, and they don't fly when they're not feeling good. Now, if you've been in the aviation industry long enough, you'll know that if we could eliminate the bad weather accidents, that's literally 80% of all of the bad things that happen in aviation. The third category would be risks that have a significant history of claims. At some point, you can only turn in so many claims before your carrier is going to turn around and walk away. And we get it. I understand that. But what we do is we will step in and we can insure the account for a couple of years until they clean up the history. It's going to cost significantly more money, and there may be coverage restrictions, but we do keep a lot of companies in business. The fourth category would be anything else. There's really no definition. It could be a one-time unique risk, such as research and development on a new type of airframe. It would be impossible for me to try to define this category because there's so much that goes into it. So basically anything else that doesn't fit anyone's box, that falls into our purview.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that. A lot can be done with aviation. A lot of things, there's a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people thinking outside of the box on how to use aircraft. And so, I know personally there's a lot of times I thought, something comes up, so out of the ordinary, I go, you know what, I just need to call Chevrette on this one. And, you think in terms of how can we, take this non-standard risk or something really way out of the box and insure it. So what are some of the thought processes or underwriting considerations? Obviously there's different types. You just highlighted 4 general categories of special risks. Like, what is that like? What are some of those underwriting considerations that go into writing a non-standard risk than would be a standard risk?
Well, the first task in underwriting an account is called risk selection, deciding which risks you're going to write. And luckily for us, our competitors do that for us. We basically sit back and wait for them to say no, and then we find a way to get it done. In terms of the underwriting, we don't really look at it any differently than any other risk. Every account that we look at has unique characteristics that factor into the equation, and from there it's just math. The goal being to create a portfolio that brings in enough revenue to outrun the claims.
Yeah, it is funny that you say that. It really is clear. There are certain risks, pro-flown, newer turbine aircraft, plenty of insurers that want to compete over that, or, high-time pilots that are not too young or not too old, flying newer aircraft is just certain aircraft that plenty of people want. And so typically, I think I heard you say 3 things that stood out to me and that I've seen. And what is obviously increased premium. Second was increased deductibles. And then third was kind of like training, safety, loss control measures to kind of address those issues. I mean, is that kind of the gist of what you want to see differently from some of these risks, or is there something else involved to help them successfully obtaining coverage?
No, there's really not. It's just, like I said, it's just a matter of the math. A lower time pilot, we may ask for more dual time. We may ask for a higher deductible, but it really falls into those 3 categories. It's going to be the training, the price, and the deductibles.
So you talked about some of the trends we're seeing in claims with obviously the increasing awards and some of these geopolitical issues. Are there any other, general trends you're seeing, particularly in claims related to non-standard risks, or claims or issues that you're seeing repeatedly that are concerning or you'd like to see the aviation community address?
Right. The trends really aren't any different than the standard market. I mean, the value of an aircraft is going to be the same regardless of who's flying it. Liability issues, like I had mentioned before, are bad for everyone. It really doesn't matter what the circumstances are these days. If somebody gets hurt or, God forbid, killed in an aircraft, the policy limit is up for grabs in a lot of cases. That said, we are really trying to minimize the liability limits that we offer on all of our policies. We do that to protect our own portfolio, but I know that from your perspective as a broker, that makes things tough because your clients have more at risk. Your clients have, bigger numbers on their balance sheets than they did 20 and 30 years ago. So there's more to protect, and it's a tough situation for you and your clients. But in terms of trends, I will say that frequency is a little higher, but the severity is no different.
At Aris Insurance Solutions, our customers tell us that they work with us because we are responsive, we get back to them quickly, we're reliable to get the job done and follow through with what they've asked us to do. We communicate effectively so they always know what we're doing. We anticipate their needs so that they don't have to think of everything they need in their aviation insurance program. And this and many more reasons are why people work with Aris Insurance Solutions. To learn how you can contact and work with Aris Insurance Solutions, click in the link below for all that information. Yeah, so more claims, claims are happening more often, but they continue to be higher or no different in severity. What else? You've been doing this a long time, and have you found certain parts, particularly of a transition pilot? We, obviously, you and I see a lot of, and this is obviously part of flying. As a pilot, you get more experience. You want to move into something faster and bigger. And have you seen, certain aspects of training, whether in aircraft or simulator or a combination of thereof, or a certain amount, like what's, a dual point? What are the things that you've seen that have been successful versus not successful in an aircraft transition that you've been a part of?
The one thing that I really tend to encourage all of our insureds is when it comes to annual training, whether it's initial or recurrent, I like to see them go to different schools every year. I think it's invaluable to get a different set of eyes on the operation. Simulator training is great. I'm not going to argue any of the valid points that anyone's made with regard to simulator training. But you don't always get the most experienced instructor. Whereas if you fly if you conduct in-aircraft training, sometimes you're going to get a pilot that may have 5,000 to 10,000 hours in that aircraft, so he can give you some insights and some advice that you're just not going to get from the simulator. So I like to see a mix. It's not always doable, so we do work with the clients. But I will say that our flexibility in that area does help our clients a lot, especially with regard to the simulators. It's just so tough to get a slot these days. I don't think the schools have fully recovered from COVID yet.
Yeah, I agree, and obviously both is good when possible. In my experience, just as a pilot, there's just things you can do in a simulator you can't do in the aircraft, but then there's things that you need to experience in the aircraft that you can't experience in the simulator. And so having that combination is definitely a winning combination whenever possible. I think most of our listeners know that you have to have reinsurance in order to write aviation coverage. Reinsurance where, the insurance company turns around and goes to other insurance companies to, write or take on a portion on the back end of the, policies and the coverage, the limits, the capacity they're offering. When it comes to non-standard risk, I guess, would you confirm that it's really the same process? You're writing non-standard risks. It's just ultimately about the bottom line you deliver and the premium brought in versus the claims paid out. Is that kind of the typical review of
it's
non-standard risk book?
It's basically the same. The reinsurance underwriters are more math-driven than we are. They don't really look at the minute details of what we do. They're not going to see the difference between a 500 and a 100,000. They're not going to see the difference between a 500 and a 1,000 hour pilot the way we would. They're going to look at the results and the numbers and the trends. It's very similar to a bank that may provide your capital for the year. Every year we go to them with our results. We tell them what we're thinking of doing in the next year, and then they will come back to us with, obviously, the price. And there's a lot of things that go into that price, one of which is my own experience. Have I made money for these people or not? Another thing is the external environment. Natural disasters, things that don't have anything to do with aviation could have an impact on my cost of reinsurance. So if we get a lot of bad hurricanes this year, even though it may not result in much of an aviation loss, the fact of the matter is it still affects the overall capital availability in the reinsurance market.
Yeah. Yeah, in reinsurance, obviously has a direct impact on the rates for the customer, for the aviation insurance buyer. Is that, obviously things change, very frequently, and we're here coming towards the end of the third quarter in 2024. But are the reinsurance rates continue to provide a lot of increased pressure to get rates up among aviation insurers from your perspective?
I don't see as much pressure on the rates going forward. I think the rates are probably just about where the reinsurers need them. But where the real pressure is coming is on the liability side. They're really pushing back on how much liability limit they want to see us offer. From their perspective, the U.S. court system is just, it's a war zone as far as they're concerned. And it's not just aviation. It's the trucking industry, auto liability. Like I said before, these settlements and verdicts have just gotten out of control. And the reinsurers see the U.S. as a very, very difficult area to insure any liability.
Yeah. Well, that's about all the questions I have for now. I just wanted to know if there's anything I should have asked you that I didn't, or if you just have any closing thoughts on this general topic, aviation insurance or underwriting non-standard aviation insurance risks.
By no means am I trying to critique my competitors. They all do a fantastic job, which is why I wanted to do something different. I didn't see the point in coming into this market and just trying to replicate what everyone else is already doing. They're doing a good job. They keep prices at a reasonable level. So we wanted to do something different. So just keep in mind that if you're having trouble getting insured, you might not like our price, but we're going to keep you flying.
Yeah. Well, very good, Mike. It's just been a pleasure to have you on the show. I've been wanting to do so for some time, and so enjoyed hearing your perspective on these topics. And so thank you for making that time to visit with me and share this with our audience today.
Thanks, Tim.
Well, that's all for this episode. Join us again next time as we continue navigating the waypoints in aviation insurance. Until then, enjoy clear skies and unlimited visibility.
Thanks for listening to the Aviation Insurance Podcast. If you found this episode of value, please share it with someone who would benefit from this information. Don't forget to subscribe in your podcast player so you don't miss any new episodes, and to help our show have more impact. This episode is brought to you by Aris Insurance Solutions, your flight plan for navigating the turbulence of aviation insurance. For more information, visit arisinsurance.com. That is www.aerisinsurance.com. Disclaimer. These episodes are for educational purposes only, and due to the changing regulatory and legal nature of the business, some information may change over time. Having a well-educated and experienced aviation insurance broker on your team is an absolute requirement to success in business and for managing your aircraft and aviation business risks.